I discovered my grandchildren had sold my antique shop when I saw strangers moving my grandfather's Civil War medals out the front door. Not just any medals. The Bronze Star he'd earned at Gettysburg, the Purple Heart from Shiloh, the faded campaign ribbons that had hung in the shop window for 47 years. Pieces of family history that weren't for sale, had never been for sale, and were supposed to pass to my great-grandchildren someday. The strangers were loading everything into a moving truck with estate liquidators painted on the side, treating my family's legacy like garage sale items to be sorted and dispersed to the highest bidder. I was standing across the street from Eleanor's Antiquities, the shop I'd opened in 1976 and run every day until my heart attack 6 months ago, watching my life's work disappear into cardboard boxes. The storefront that had been my second home for nearly 5 decades now had a "sold" sign in the window and a notice of business closure taped to the door. My name had already been painted over, replaced by "Coming Soon, Modern Living Furniture Store." Modern Living. They were going to turn my carefully curated collection of American history into a showroom for mass-produced furniture from overseas factories. But it was the sight of my grandson Michael directing the liquidators that made my hands shake with something beyond heartbreak. Michael, who'd spent summers working in the shop as a teenager. Michael, who'd learned to identify Depression glass and Civil War memorabilia at my knee. Michael, who'd promised just 6 months ago that he'd keep an eye on things while I recovered. He was keeping an eye on things, all right. He was making sure every valuable piece found its way to auction houses and private collectors while I was supposedly too sick to notice. "Mrs. Patterson? Are you all right?" I turned to find Dr. Sarah Chin, the cardiologist who'd been treating me since my heart attack, looking at me with concern. "I'm fine," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. "You shouldn't be walking this far so soon after your procedure. Did someone drive you here?" I took the bus. At 78, I still had my driver's license, but my granddaughter Lisa had convinced me to take a break from driving while I recovered. For my own safety, she'd said. Another lie. Another way to isolate me from my own life while they systematically destroyed it. "Mrs. Patterson, what's wrong? You look upset." I gestured toward the moving truck, the strangers handling my treasures, the grandson who was supposed to be protecting my legacy. "They sold my shop. My family sold my shop and didn't tell me." Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "Without your consent?" "I never consented to anything. 6 months ago, I had a heart attack. 6 months ago, they convinced me to sign some papers while I was still on morphine in the hospital. I thought I was signing medical forms." "What did you actually sign?" "I don't know. I was barely conscious. Lisa said it was just insurance paperwork, nothing to worry about." But looking at the systematic liquidation happening across the street, I had a terrible suspicion about what those papers might have been. Power of attorney forms. Business transfer documents. Legal authority to make decisions about my assets while I was incapacitated. Dr. Chin pulled out her phone. "Mrs. Patterson, do you have a lawyer?" "I had one. Robert Morrison. But he passed away last year." "Then you need a new one. Today." "What you're describing sounds like elder abuse." Elder abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were wrong, but because they were exactly right. My grandchildren, the babies I'd rocked to sleep, the children I'd spoiled with candy and stories, the teenagers I'd employed and trained and trusted with my life's work, had used my medical crisis as an opportunity to steal everything I'd built. But here's what they'd forgotten about Eleanor Patterson. I might be 78 and recovering from a heart attack, but I was also the woman who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd survived the death of 2 husbands, who'd raised 4 children and helped raise 7 grandchildren. I was also the woman who'd kept meticulous records of everything in my shop, including items that were never supposed to be sold. They thought a heart attack had made me helpless. They were about to learn it had made me furious. Dr. Chin drove me home and waited while I searched through the papers Lisa had been organizing for me since my heart attack. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The medical forms I'd thought I was signing in the hospital were actually comprehensive legal documents. Power of attorney giving Lisa control over my finances. Business transfer papers naming Michael as owner of the shop. Healthcare directives that essentially gave my family authority to make all decisions about my medical treatment and living situation. All signed while I was heavily medicated and barely conscious, when I couldn't have understood what I was agreeing to even if someone had explained it properly. "This is fraud," Dr. Chen said, reading over the documents. "You were in no condition to make these kinds of legal decisions immediately after your heart attack. Can I undo it? If we can prove you were mentally incapacitated when you signed these documents, yes. The question is whether we can prove that. You were my doctor. You know what condition I was in." "I do. And I documented everything. But Eleanor, this is going to be a fight. Your family will claim you were competent, that you understood what you were signing, that you wanted them to have control. Even though I never discussed any of this with them before my heart attack? Even though adult children who steal from elderly parents are usually very good at creating narratives that justify their actions." I spent the rest of the afternoon calling lawyers, most of whom were too busy or too expensive for a 78-year-old woman whose family had just stolen her life savings in the form of a business. But the fourth lawyer I called, Janet Rodriguez, specialized in elder law and agreed to see me immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, what you're describing is unfortunately very common. Adult children often use medical emergencies as opportunities to gain control over elderly parents' assets. What can we do? First, we challenge the validity of those documents based on your mental state when you sign them. Second, we document the assets that have been liquidated without your consent. Third, we file for emergency injunctive relief to stop any further disposal of your property. How long will that take? If we move fast, we can get a temporary restraining order within days. But Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something difficult. How much of your shop's inventory was supposed to be for sale, and how much was personal property?" I thought about my grandfather's medals, my grandmother's china, the family photographs and documents I'd kept in the shop office. About 30% was family property that was never supposed to be sold. The rest was legitimate inventory, but selling it without my consent is still theft. Do you have documentation distinguishing between family property and business inventory? 47 years of documentation. Every piece is cataloged, photographed, and categorized. I keep detailed records of everything. Janet smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. "Then we have them. But first, I needed to know exactly how much they'd stolen and how long they'd been planning it. So I did something I'd learned during my years in the antique business. I started investigating. The next morning, while my family thought I was resting at home, I took another bus downtown to visit my accountant. Harold Kim had been managing my shop's finances for 20 years. If anyone would know about unusual transactions or account changes, it would be him. "Eleanor, how are you feeling? I heard about the heart attack." "I'm recovering. But Harold, I need your help with something. Can you show me the recent activity on my business accounts?" His expression grew uncomfortable. "Eleanor, I thought Lisa explained the situation to you. About the business transfer and the liquidation decisions." What Lisa explained and what actually happened seemed to be two different things. "Show me the accounts, Harold." He pulled up my records on his computer, and what I saw made my chest tighten with something that had nothing to do with my heart condition. "Harold, there have been massive withdrawals from my business accounts over the past 5 months. Tens of thousands of dollars. Who authorized these?" "Lisa did. She has power of attorney." "Show me the first withdrawal. When was it?" He scrolled back through the records. "March 15th. About 2 weeks after your heart attack." 2 weeks. They'd waited exactly 2 weeks after I nearly died to start stealing from me. What was the withdrawal for? Business expenses, according to the documentation Lisa provided. Rent, utilities, employee payroll. "Harold, I own the building. I don't pay rent. I don't have employees except family members who work for free. What business expenses could possibly justify $20,000 in withdrawals?" He looked uncomfortable. "Eleanor, I assumed you knew about these decisions. Lisa said you'd discussed liquidating some inventory to pay for medical expenses and ongoing care." "I never discussed liquidating anything. And my medical expenses are covered by Medicare and my supplemental insurance." But she showed me estimates for in-home care, modified living arrangements, accessibility improvements to your house. None of which I'd requested or needed. My house was already accessible, I didn't need in-home care, and I was perfectly capable of living independently. But they'd created a false narrative of my needs to justify stealing my money. Harold, I want copies of every withdrawal, every authorization document Lisa provided, and every communication about my accounts. Eleanor, I can't just. Harold, I'm the account holder. Lisa's power of attorney doesn't give her the right to hide financial information from me. If you don't provide these records, I'll have my lawyer subpoena them. 30 minutes later, I left Harold's office with a file folder full of evidence. Unauthorized withdrawals totaling nearly $80,000 over 5 months. False documentation of my medical needs and living expenses. Forged signatures on checks I'd never seen. But the most damaging evidence was a series of emails between Lisa and Michael discussing the timeline for full liquidation and maximizing asset recovery before Mom gets suspicious. They'd been planning this since the day I had my heart attack. My next stop was the shop itself. The sold sign was still in the window, but the liquidation was still ongoing. Perfect opportunity to document what was being stolen. I positioned myself in the coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the loading process and started taking photographs. Every box, every piece of furniture, every item being removed from my shop. Most importantly, I photographed the items that were never supposed to be sold. Family heirlooms, personal property, irreplaceable pieces of history that belonged to my great-grandchildren, not to auction houses. My grandfather's medals weren't the only family treasures disappearing into that truck. My grandmother's wedding china, my mother's jewelry, photograph albums dating back to the 1800s, documents and papers that told the story of our family's history in America. Everything was being treated like merchandise to be liquidated for cash. But the most heartbreaking sight was Michael himself, directing the loading with the clinical efficiency of someone who felt no emotional connection to the items being removed. This was the boy I'd taught to identify authentic depression glass. The teenager who'd helped me research the provenance of Civil War artifacts. The young man who'd claimed to love history as much as I did. He was selling our family's history to strangers. That evening, I called Lisa. Grandma Eleanor. How are you feeling? I've been meaning to visit, but things have been so busy with work and the kids. I went downtown today, Lisa. Downtown? Grandma, you shouldn't be taking buses. What if something happened? What if you had another heart attack? I went to see Harold. And I saw the shop. Silence. Grandma, I can explain. Explain what? How you've been stealing from me for 5 months. How you've liquidated my business and sold my family heirlooms without my knowledge or consent. We're not stealing anything. We're managing your assets while you recover. The doctor said you needed to reduce stress. Which doctor said I needed my business sold and my family property liquidated? Dr. Morrison said you shouldn't be worrying about business operations while your heart heals. Dr. Morrison said I needed to avoid stress, not that I needed my life stolen from me. There's a difference, Lisa. Grandma, you're not thinking clearly. The medications, the stress of the heart attack. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Clear enough to know that what you've done is called elder abuse, and it's a felony. You can't be serious. We're your family. We're trying to help you. If you were trying to help me, you would have asked me what I wanted before you started selling my life. If you were trying to help me, you wouldn't have forged my signature on checks. If you were trying to help me, you wouldn't have liquidated family heirlooms that belong to your own children. Grandma, I want everything stopped. The liquidation, the sales, the financial transactions. All of it. Today. It's too late for that. Contracts have been signed, buyers have paid deposits. Then you'd better figure out how to unsign them. Because if one more piece of my property leaves that shop, I'm calling the police. I hung up before she could respond. 20 minutes later, Michael called. Grandma Eleanor, Lisa told me about your conversation. I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is that you thought I wouldn't notice being robbed by my own grandchildren. We haven't robbed anyone. We've been trying to help you manage your finances during your recovery. By selling my grandfather's medals? By liquidating my family's history? By forging my signature on financial documents? Those medals were just sitting in the shop window collecting dust. Those medals represent your great-great-grandfather's service in the Civil War. They're part of your children's heritage, not merchandise to be sold to collectors. Grandma, we need to be realistic about your situation. You're 78 years old, you've had a major heart attack, you can't keep running a business forever. So you decided to steal it instead of asking me what I wanted? We decided to help you transition to a more manageable lifestyle. You decided to cash out my life while I was unconscious and hope I'd be too confused or grateful to object. That's not. Michael, I raised you. I know when you're lying to me. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Janet Rodriguez moved faster than I'd expected. By the end of the week, we had a temporary restraining order freezing all sales of my property and requiring my grandchildren to account for every transaction they'd made using my assets. But the legal victory felt hollow when I saw what remained of my shop. Nearly 60% of my inventory was gone. Sold, shipped, dispersed to buyers across the country. The systematic liquidation had been more thorough than I'd realized, and recovering items that had already been sold would be nearly impossible. The good news, Janet explained, is that we can pursue damages for the full value of everything that was sold without your consent. The bad news is that money can't replace irreplaceable family heirlooms. What about the business itself? That's more complicated. The transfer documents appear to be legal, even if they were signed under questionable circumstances. We'll need to prove you were mentally incapacitated when you signed them. How do we do that? Medical records, witness testimony, expert evaluation. We build a case showing that someone in your condition couldn't have made informed decisions about such complex legal and financial matters. But building that case would take months, and in the meantime, my life's work was being dismantled by people who saw it only as assets to be liquidated. The personal cost was even higher than the financial one. Lisa and Michael had enlisted other family members in their narrative that I was confused and making unfounded accusations. My daughter Karen, Lisa's mother, called to suggest I might need professional help dealing with the paranoid thoughts I was having about my own family. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of your heart attack, the medications. Karen, I have bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals of $80,000. I have emails from your daughter discussing timeline for liquidation. I have photographs of family heirlooms being loaded into moving trucks. What part of that is paranoid? Lisa showed me the power of attorney documents you signed. You gave them permission to manage your affairs. I signed documents while I was barely conscious, thinking they were medical forms. I never intended to give anyone permission to steal my business and sell my family property. Mom, they're not stealing anything. They're helping you transition to a lifestyle that's more appropriate for your age and health condition. By selling my grandfather's metals without asking me, by relieving you of business responsibilities that were becoming too stressful for your heart condition. The gaslighting was systematic and thorough. They'd created a narrative where my objections to being robbed were evidence of my mental decline, where my anger at being betrayed was proof that I needed more help from the people who were stealing from me. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I'd be too embarrassed, too confused, or too tired to fight back. They'd forgotten that I was Eleanor Patterson, and I'd been fighting for everything I had since I was 22 years old. 6 weeks into the legal battle, I received an unexpected ally. My great-grandson Tommy, Michael's 15-year-old son, showed up at my house one afternoon looking uncomfortable and carrying a cardboard box. Great-grandma Eleanor? Can I talk to you? Of course, sweetheart. What's in the box? Some stuff from the shop. Stuff Dad told me to throw away, but I thought you might want it instead. He opened the box to reveal photograph albums, family documents, and personal papers that had been in my office. Things with no monetary value but immense sentimental worth. Tommy, these are precious to me. Thank you for saving them. Great-grandma, can I ask you something? Are Dad and Aunt Lisa really stealing from you? I sat down beside him, considering how to answer honestly without burdening a teenager with adult family dysfunction. What do you think, Tommy? I think they sold a lot of stuff without asking you. And I think when you found out, you got upset, and they said you were confused instead of saying they were sorry. Out of the mouths of babes. That's a pretty accurate assessment. The thing is, Dad keeps saying you're not thinking clearly because of your heart attack. But you seem fine to me. I mean, you're old, but you're not, like, crazy old. Thank you for that ringing endorsement of my mental faculties. He smiled. You know what I mean. I do. And Tommy, I want you to know that whatever happens between me and your father, it doesn't change how I feel about you. I know. But great-grandma? I saved some other stuff too. He pulled out his phone and showed me dozens of photographs he'd taken during the liquidation. Pictures of items being loaded, prices being paid, buyers taking possession of family property. I thought maybe you'd want to know where everything went. You know, in case you wanted to try to get it back someday. The documentation was thorough and damning. My grandfather's medals sold to a private collector in Texas for $8,000. My grandmother's china set sold to an antique dealer in California for $1,200. Dozens of family photographs and documents sold in bulk lots to paper collectors and historians. Everything photographed, documented, and priced like merchandise. Tommy, this is incredibly helpful. But sweetheart, I need to ask you something. Are you okay? At home, I mean? With your father and this situation. He was quiet for a moment. It's weird. Dad keeps saying he's doing what's best for you, but then he gets really angry when people ask questions about it. And he bought a new car last month, even though Mom said we couldn't afford it. A new car. Bought with money stolen from my business. Have you told anyone else about the photos you took? No. I wasn't sure if I should. I mean, Dad's my dad, but what they did seems really wrong. It is wrong, Tommy. And you taking these pictures was very brave. Are you going to get in trouble for fighting back? Probably. But sometimes getting in trouble is worth it if you're fighting for what's right. That evening, I called Janet Rodriguez with the new evidence Tommy had provided. Eleanor, this is a goldmine. Photographic evidence of the liquidation, documentation of items sold, even potential evidence of your grandson using stolen funds for personal purchases. What does it mean for the case? It means we can prove specific items were sold without your consent, track where the money went, and possibly even recover some pieces if buyers are willing to cooperate. And the business transfer? That's still complex, but Tommy's testimony could be crucial. He's a minor, he has no financial interest in the outcome, and he witnessed the entire process. His account of events could be very powerful. But using Tommy's testimony would mean asking a 15-year-old boy to testify against his own father in open court. Janet, I won't put that child in the middle of this unless there's no other choice. I understand. But Eleanor, you need to know that your grandchildren are planning to escalate this. They're claiming that your legal action proves you're mentally unstable, that you need guardianship for your own protection. They're what? They're filing a petition for emergency guardianship, claiming that your paranoid accusations and irrational behavior demonstrate that you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. So that was their endgame. Not just stealing my business and property, but having me declared incompetent so they could control everything permanently. Can they do that? They can try. But Eleanor, we're ready for them. Medical records show you're mentally competent. Financial records show they've been stealing from you. And now we have photographic evidence of the systematic liquidation they've been claiming was necessary for your care. When? Next week. Emergency hearing to determine whether you need immediate protection from your own decisions. I hung up and sat in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been systematically dismantled by people who claimed to love me. But they'd made one final miscalculation. They thought I'd be too ashamed, too tired, or too afraid to fight them in open court. They were about to learn that some battles are worth everything, even when the enemy shares your DNA. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the stakes felt enormous. On one side sat Lisa and Michael with their attorney, looking professional and concerned, playing the roles of devoted grandchildren worried about their elderly grandmother's deteriorating mental state. On the other side sat me with Janet Rodriguez, armed with medical records, financial documents, and photographic evidence of systematic theft. Your Honor, their attorney began, we're here because Mrs. Patterson has been making increasingly paranoid and irrational accusations against her own family members. She claims they've been stealing from her, when in fact they've been managing her affairs under valid power of attorney documents she signed herself. She's been refusing medical advice, making dangerous decisions about her living situation, and pursuing frivolous legal action against family members who are trying to help her transition to appropriate care for someone her age. I listened to myself being described as a confused, ungrateful elderly woman who was too paranoid to accept help from loving family members. Then Janet stood up. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a confused elderly woman making paranoid accusations. What we have is a victim of systematic financial elder abuse fighting back against family members who used her medical crisis as an opportunity to steal her life's work." She presented the evidence methodically. Medical records showing I was mentally competent. Bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals totaling over $80,000. Photographs showing family heirlooms being sold without my knowledge or consent. Mrs. Patterson signed legal documents while heavily medicated and barely conscious following a major heart attack. She was told these were medical forms, not comprehensive power of attorney documents that would give her family control over her finances and business. When she discovered what had been done, she took appropriate legal action to protect her remaining assets. Her family's response was not to apologize or make restitution, but to claim she was mentally incompetent for objecting to being robbed. The judge looked at the evidence, then at my grandchildren, then at me. "Mrs. Patterson, can you tell me in your own words what happened?" I stood up, feeling every one of my 78 years, but also feeling the strength that had carried me through decades of building and protecting what I'd earned. "Your Honor, 6 months ago I had a heart attack. While I was in the hospital, barely conscious and heavily medicated, my granddaughter Lisa convinced me to sign what I thought were medical forms. Those documents turned out to be power of attorney papers giving her control over my finances and business. Over the next 5 months, she and my grandson Michael systematically liquidated my antique shop, selling family heirlooms and business inventory without my knowledge. When I discovered what had been done and took legal action to stop it, they claimed I was mentally incompetent for objecting to being robbed by my own family." "Mrs. Patterson," the judge asked, "do you believe your grandchildren acted with malicious intent, or is it possible they genuinely believed they were acting in your best interests?" I thought about Tommy's photographs, about the new car Michael had bought with my money, about the systematic way they'd liquidated everything of value while telling everyone I was too confused to manage my own affairs. "Your Honor, people who genuinely believe they're acting in your best interests don't hide what they're doing from you. They don't forge signatures on checks. They don't sell family heirlooms without asking. And when confronted, they apologize and make restitution. They don't try to have you declared incompetent." The judge was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the evidence. "Based on the documentation presented, I find no evidence that Mrs. Patterson is mentally incompetent or in need of guardianship. I do find evidence of unauthorized financial transactions and possible elder abuse. The petition for guardianship is denied. The temporary restraining order protecting Mrs. Patterson's assets will remain in place pending resolution of the civil litigation. Furthermore, I'm ordering a criminal investigation into the financial transactions documented in this case." Lisa and Michael's faces went white. The criminal investigation resulted in charges of financial elder abuse against both Lisa and Michael. Lisa pleaded guilty and was sentenced to probation and restitution. Michael chose to fight the charges and was convicted at trial, sentenced to 18 months in prison. The civil lawsuit recovered most of the money they'd stolen, though many of the irreplaceable family heirlooms were never returned. But the most important victory wasn't legal or financial, it was personal. Tommy moved in with me after Michael went to prison, and together we've been slowly rebuilding what was lost. Not the business, at 78, I don't have the energy to start over completely. But the family legacy, the stories, the connections between past and future. Tommy is learning about our family history, about the Civil War ancestors whose medals were sold, about the Depression-era grandmother whose china was liquidated, about the importance of preserving memory in a world that treats everything as disposable. He's also learning about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you relationships with people you love. Great-Grandma Eleanor, he asked me recently, "Do you think Dad and Aunt Lisa will ever understand what they did wrong?" "I think they'll understand the legal consequences," I said. Whether they'll understand the moral consequences is harder to say. Do you forgive them? I thought about that question. Did I forgive the grandchildren who'd stolen my life's work, sold my family's history, and tried to have me declared incompetent when I fought back? I forgive them for being human, I said finally. I don't forgive them for choosing greed over love, convenience over respect, or their own comfort over my dignity. What's the difference? The difference is that forgiving someone doesn't mean trusting them again. It means letting go of the anger so it doesn't poison your own life. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. So forgiveness is for you, not for them? Exactly. At 78, I've learned that family isn't defined by shared DNA or childhood memories. It's defined by who shows up when you need them, who tells the truth even when it's difficult, and who chooses your well-being over their own convenience. Lisa and Michael failed that test. But Tommy passed it with flying colors. He's my real legacy now. Not the business they stole or the money they spent, but a young man who learned what integrity looks like by watching his great-grandmother refuse to be destroyed by people who underestimated her strength. Some lessons can't be taught in classrooms or inherited through wills. They have to be lived, witnessed, and chosen. Tommy chose to stand with truth over comfort, with justice over family loyalty, with an elderly woman's dignity over his own father's convenience. That's a legacy worth more than any antique shop. That's inheritance that can't be stolen.